The scorching Afghan sun beat down on Forward Operation Base Ripper as Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stepped off the Black Hawk helicopter, her civilian clothes caked with dust from the covert operation she'd just completed. 3 days of surveillance in a nearby village, gathering intelligence on a high-value target, had left her exhausted and famished. The mess hall beckoned like an oasis. Sarah had joined the Navy at 18. Following in the footsteps of her grandfather, who'd served alongside Lieutenant Audie Murphy in the Korean War. When the combat exclusion policy was lifted, she'd become one of the first women to complete BUDS S training, earning her trident against overwhelming odds. Now, at 32, she commanded an elite special operations unit that few knew existed. The mess hall buzzed with activity as Marines, Army Rangers, and Air Force personnel mingled over lukewarm coffee and powdered eggs. Sarah kept her head down, preferring anonymity. Her team was still in the field, and she'd returned early to brief command on critical intelligence they'd gathered. Without her uniform or insignia, she looked like any other civilian contractor. She grabbed the tray and joined the chow line, her mind still processing what she'd witnessed in the village. Movements suggesting an imminent attack on a nearby school. Children's lives were at stake, and the intelligence she carried could prevent a massacre. "Hey, move it along!" barked the voice behind her. Sarah turned to see a Marine captain, his uniform pristine, his face unmarked by the grit of combat operations. "Sorry, sir," she said, reaching for a plate of eggs. The captain snorted. Contractors, always holding up the line. He shoved past her, knocking her tray and sending her food clattering to the floor. "Eat it, bitch!" he sneered, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. The mess hall fell silent. Sarah felt eyes on her, some curious, others embarrassed by the captain's behavior. She'd faced worse, much worse, during her career, but something about his casual cruelty struck a nerve. Colonel Merrill Tenjdoll, the highest-ranking officer present, and one of the few who knew Sarah's true role, rose from her seat. The colonel had been the first African-American woman to fly the U-2 spy plane before joining Special Operations Command, and she recognized the look in Sarah's eyes, the measured calculation of a predator deciding whether to strike. "Colonel," Colonel Tenjdoll called out, her voice cutting through the silence, "I believe you owe Lieutenant Mitchell an apology." The captain turned, confusion crossing his face. "Lieutenant?" "Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, Navy SEAL and current commander of Task Force Spectre." The captain's face drained of color as he processed this information. Task Force Spectre was legendary, a joint special operations unit responsible for some of the most daring missions of the war. Sarah straightened, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. In her mind flashed images of her journey, the brutal training under Colonel Eileen Collins, the midnight raids, the mission where she'd saved her entire team with only a combat knife after their weapons malfunctioned in a sandstorm. The mess hall remained silent, tension building as the captain struggled to respond. What he didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that Sarah carried intelligence that would launch a major operation within hours. An operation that would test not only her leadership, but the very prejudices that still plagued the military's most elite units. And somewhere in the mountains, terrorists were preparing an attack that only Sarah and her team could stop. The captain's face flushed crimson as whispers rippled through the mess hall. Lieutenant, I didn't realize." Sarah raised her hand, cutting him off. "Save it. We've got bigger problems." She turned to Colonel Tenjdoll. "Ma'am, we need to talk. Now." Within minutes, Sarah was briefing the colonel and base command on what she'd discovered. A Taliban splinter group was planning to attack a girls' school in Kandahar province tonight. The intelligence was solid, but time was critical. "We need to move immediately," Sarah insisted, pointing to the map. "My team is still embedded near the village, but they're too few to stop this alone." The captain who'd confronted her in the mess hall stood awkwardly at the back of the room. Colonel Tenjdoll noticed. "Captain Reynolds, your Marine unit is closest to the target. You'll provide support for Lieutenant Mitchell's operation." Sarah's jaw tightened. Working with Reynolds wasn't ideal, but she had no choice. Lives were at stake, As darkness fell, Sarah led a joint team of SEALs and Marines toward the school. The night vision cast everything in an eerie green glow as they moved silently through rocky terrain. Captain Reynolds kept pace beside her, his earlier arrogance replaced by tense professionalism. "My brother's unit was ambushed last month," he said quietly as they paused behind a ridge. "Someone pulled him out. I heard it was Spectre." Sarah said nothing, checking her weapon instead. That operation had cost her 2 good men. The radio crackled. "Overwatch the Spectre lead. We've got movement. Southeast corner. Multiple tangles, heavily armed." Sarah signaled the team to hold position. Something felt wrong. The intelligence had indicated an attack from the north, not the southeast. Either her information was flawed, or... "It's a trap," she whispered, realization dawning. They knew we were coming. Before she could relay this to the team, the night erupted in gunfire. A rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the ridge above them, showering them with debris. 2 Marines went down immediately. "Fall back," Sarah shouted, returning fire as she dragged one of the wounded men behind cover. Captain Reynolds reappeared at her side, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. "We're surrounded," he yelled over the gunfire. "No way out." Sarah's mind raced. Their extraction point was compromised, communications were being jammed, and they were outnumbered at least 3-1. Worse, she realized the school attack was still happening. This ambush was meant to prevent them from stopping it. "We need to split up," she decided. "I'll take a small team to the school. You get the wounded to that ravine and hold position until extraction." Reynolds stared at her. "That's suicide, Lieutenant." "I need to reach those girls," Sarah replied, checking her ammunition. She had 1 magazine left, plus her sidearm, and the combat knife that had saved her life more times than she could count. She selected 3 operators, her most experienced, and prepared to move out. As she turned to go, Reynolds grabbed her arm. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "Let me come instead of one of your men. My Marines will follow Sergeant Willis." Sarah studied him, seeing something she hadn't before, not arrogance, but a desperate need to prove himself. She nodded once. They moved through the darkness, using techniques Sarah had learned from Lieutenant Susan Ann Cuddy's tactical handbook. Twice they nearly walked into enemy patrols. Once, Sarah had to silently eliminate a sentry with her knife, the man's warm blood coating her hands as she lowered him to the ground. When they finally reached the ridge overlooking the school, Sarah's heart sunk. The attack had already begun. Gunfire echoed from the building and flames laked at one corner. Inside were 30 girls and their teachers, trapped and terrified. 4 of us against at least 20 of them, Reynolds whispered, his voice tight. Sarah checked her watch. Extraction was in 40 minutes, if it came at all. She unsheathed her knife, the same one she'd used when saving her team during the infamous sandstorm operation. "Then we better get started," she said.
Sarah signaled her team to spread out around the school's perimeter. "We go in fast and loud," she whispered. "Create confusion, make them think we're a larger force." Reynolds nodded, his earlier arrogance replaced by grim determination. "On your command, Lieutenant." They struck like lightning. Sarah took the front entrance, tossing a flashbang through the window before kicking in the door. The explosion disoriented the attackers inside, giving her precious seconds to take down 2 gunmen with precise shots. Behind her, Reynolds moved with unexpected efficiency, covering her flank as he pushed deeper into the building. Gunfire erupted from all sides as the insurgents realized they were under attack. Sarah's team communicated through hand signals, systematically clearing rooms and evacuating terrified children and teachers to a secure classroom at the rear of the building. 9 tangles down, reported one of Sarah's SEALs through the radio. "But we've got a problem. They've rigged explosives throughout the east wing." Sarah's blood ran cold. They had minutes, maybe seconds. "Reynolds," she called, "get these civilians out through the back. My team will handle the explosives." "There's no time," he argued. "We need to move now." A bullet whizzed past Sarah, embedding itself in the wall inches from her head. She returned fire, dropping another attacker. "That's an order, Captain." Something in her voice, the absolute certainty of command, made Reynolds hesitate only briefly before nodding. "Yes, ma'am." As Reynolds led the evacuation, Sarah and her remaining SEAL moved toward the east wing. The timer on the first explosive device they found showed 3 minutes remaining. "Can you disarm it?" she asked. Her teammate examined the wiring. "Not all of them, not in time, but I can delay this one." "Do it. I'll find the others." Sarah moved methodically through the building, locating 3 more devices. Outside, she could hear the sounds of Reynolds organizing the civilians, moving them to safety. Her radio crackled with updates from the Marine unit. They'd held off the ambush and extraction was inbound. 2 minutes left. Sarah's teammate joined her, his face grim. First device is delayed by 2 minutes. The others are linked. We can't disarm them without triggering an immediate detonation. Sarah made her decision instantly. Get out. I'll create a controlled collapse to contain the blast. Lieutenant, go. That's an order. Alone, Sarah worked frantically, using techniques she learned from Colonel William Billy Mitchell's explosive containment protocols. She moved furniture, created barriers, and strategically weakened specific support structures while reinforcing others. If she did this right, the explosion would collapse inward rather than outward. 1 minute left. Outside, the evacuation was complete. Reynolds had returned to the building entrance, calling for her. Mitchell, we need to move. Sarah finished her preparations and ran for the exit, the countdown ticking in her head. She burst through the door just as the first explosion rocked the building. Reynolds grabbed her arm, pulling her clear as he sprinted toward the perimeter. The building imploded behind them, a controlled collapse that contained most of the blast. The shockwave still knocked them forward, Sarah landing hard on her injured shoulder, Reynolds beside her. As dawn broke over the mountains, extraction helicopters appeared on the horizon. The children and teachers huddled together, shaken but alive. Sarah's team had suffered injuries but no casualties. The Marine unit had lost 2 men in the ambush, with several others wounded. Colonel Tengestal arrived with the medical evacuation team, surveying the scene with a mixture of relief and pride. Well done, Lieutenant, she said, helping Sarah to her feet. Captain Reynolds approached, his uniform torn and bloodied. Lieutenant Mitchell, he said formally, extending his hand. I owe you more than an apology. Sarah accepted his handshake. You performed admirably, Captain. Your Marine should be proud. Later, as the medical team treated her wounds, Sarah received word that her intelligence had led to the capture of 3 high-value targets. The operation was being hailed as a major success. Colonel Tengestal sat beside her. The Joint Chiefs are impressed. They're talking about promoting you to lead the new Combined Special Operations Task Force. Sarah looked across the tarmac where Reynolds was checking on his wounded Marines. He caught her eye and nodded respectfully. The best warriors aren't defined by their strength, but by how they rise after being knocked down. The colonel smiled. Like you did in that mess hall? Sarah fingered the combat knife at her belt, the one that had saved so many lives, including her own. No, Colonel, like we all do, every day in this war. The only difference is, some of us get back up faster than others. As the sun climbed higher over the Afghan mountains, Sarah Mitchell, Navy SEAL, commander, warrior, closed her eyes briefly, knowing that tomorrow would bring new battles, but at least today, the victory was theirs.